In this lesson, we'll work on creating surface bodies. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to create a sketch spline, sweep a surface, loft a surface, use trim surface, use extend, and stitch a group of surfaces. Now that we have our copied surfaces or our offset surfaces, we want to start to create solid bodies from those. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to start to build the solid bodies, and I want to take them up into the rest of the X star body. So I'm actually going to delete this fillet as well, and I'm going to start with this edge here. I'm going to go to Modify, Extend. I'm going to take this edge up until it hits the inside of the solid body. Now remember, it's okay to have a little bit of overlap, and actually it helps out as long as we don't go too far. So we're going to use 9 millimeters, and we're going to say OK. So what this does is it gives me a good reference for where the rest of the body needs to sit. So we're going to do Extend again, and we're going to take this edge and we're going to pull this one up. And notice that 1 millimeter, it perfectly lines up with this edge. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to repeat the command. And now I have a single edge that I can pull up, and this time it's going to go up 8 millimeters. Notice that 8 millimeters comes up through the top, so we'll take it down to 6 millimeters. We'll say OK. Now I want to temporarily hide the X star body. I want to make sure that these end up at the same level. So I'm going to edit the last command. And note that if I take it to 7 millimeters, that it'll still be inside the X star body, but that what we're actually doing is we're taking them up to the same level. Next, I'm going to build a patch between the two. Now you notice that if I select this entire thing, it doesn't allow me to keep these sharp corners here. So in order to connect those, what we can actually do is loft from one side to the other and say OK. And now we can build a patch for this opening on the side. Now notice when I do this, it's trying to select the entire opening because we have enabled chaining on. If you turn chaining off, then you're able to select those surrounding edges. We're going to repeat the process on the other side, making sure that enable chaining is turned off. And once we have all of those completed, we're going to modify this, and we're going to use the stitch option. And notice that when we do this, it's trying to stitch all of these bodies. Because they were originally one big body and we deleted faces, they still are all contained as one. Now in order to break them apart, we need to go to Modify and Unstitch, and we can select them, we can say OK, and now they're each individual surface bodies. So now when we go to Stitch, we can select each individual face over here, we can put them together as one body. And once we have a closed body, and you can tell this because we have green edges all the way around, no red edges that tell us that we have an open, we can go ahead and say OK. And notice that this is now converted to a solid body. So we took the open surfaces, we built the rest of the geometry, and we made it a solid body. So this means now that if we want to, we can go back to the X star, and we can combine these two to a single solid body. Now this is actually very good orientation because it carries this geometry back down to this face, and it also brings it up into the higher I-beam shaped wall. So it's going to give us a little bit of additional structure, and then we can add some fillets and we can blend it into the rest of the X star body when we get to that point. The next thing that we need to do is we need to build this set of surfaces back into this body. Now we can do it a few different ways. We can just come up and go back like we would with some simple extrudes, or we can try to blend it backwards. To get started, I'm going to go to Create, Offset, and I'm going to offset that front face, but I want to turn off chain selection. This will allow me to grab just a single face and not everything that has tangency. We're going to say OK, and then we're going to hide the X star body. So now we have this single front face to work with. And as we take a look at this, you will also notice that we have a small gap between the front face and this body. But since we're intersecting with solid geometry, the wall thickness of 2 millimeters here, this will be okay and it won't produce any errors when we go to do a 3D print and convert it to an STL file. But keep in mind that those small gaps can be problematic if it goes the other way and you're leaving a small space in between rather than having that solid geometry overlap. So in order to carry this back, I'm going to start with a sketch. From my origin, if I take a look at the sketch planes that I have, my YZ plane is centered on my design. If I start a new sketch on the YZ plane and I select Sketch, Project Include, Intersect, and I come over to these surfaces, you can see that that plane actually intersects with those surfaces, and this gives me a good reference. So this tells me that I can draw a path where I want to blend this back in, and I can use that path for a loft or a sweep or some other type of operation. So I'm going to come back, and I know where the top position is, and I know where the bottom position is of that face. And I'm going to connect it with a spline. So we're going to come into spline, we're going to start from here, we're going to go to here, and we'll say OK. I'm going to select the spline and control select this edge. And I want to apply a tangent relation. So now I have a tangent constraint. And then this edge here we can either make horizontal or we can blend it in some other way. But I'm going to take that edge and I'm going to say horizontal. And then lastly, I can drag these out and I can change the weight of influence that happens here. So we have a tangency here, we have a horizontal here, and we can control the shape of the curve by adjusting the weight. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go to Sketch and I want to create an offset. So I want to offset this as well as this, and I want to bring it in. It looks like it's somewhere between -4.5 and -5. So I don't think we're going to get an exact amount here, so I'm going to say -4.5 and OK. And then I want to delete this dimension, and I want to make this line coincident. Now notice that it gives me an issue here, because if we select this and we look at the constraints that are applied, we have an offset constraint. So if we get rid of that offset constraint by selecting it and hitting delete on the keyboard, this line is now free to move in and out. We can now make it coincident with this point, and now it's fully defined. Now with surfaces, we don't have to worry as much about intersecting with this edge because we can actually take this surface and we can extend it out past and then use that surface to trim. So let's go ahead and see how this works for us. We're going to stop the sketch, we're going to go into Create, and we're going to select Sweep. We'll do a single path, and for the profile, I'm going to turn off chain selection, and I want to use this edge. For the path, I'm going to use my spline, and I'm going to say OK. So now I've taken this edge and I've done that nice smooth spline transition completely up to the top. We also should remember as we're doing this that this top is not completely flat. So the top is not flat, it's got a little bit of curvature to it, even though it's right at the center. So that could produce a small problem in just a second when we go to thicken this or when we go to create a solid out of it. One way that we can approach that is by taking a look at the sketch that we created. Let's go ahead and show the sketch. When we create our feature, we can do a loft, and we can go from this upper edge, we're going to add a new profile to this edge, and for the rail, we're going to add the spline. We can drag these in. Now we're not going to get it perfectly parallel, but we can drag them in, and we can get it fairly close by visualizing it, and that way we're going perfectly to that shape. Another way that we can do this is to start another sketch. This time we're going to create a sketch on our front plane. And we can trim this surface by creating lines that go straight up. And I'll make this line vertical. We can go to Modify and Trim. Use this sketch as our trim tool, and we can remove both sides. We'll go ahead and hide that last trim sketch. Now if we come to create loft, we can go from this edge to this edge, and we can use our spline as our rail. Now note, because we are using edges of surfaces, we can add tangency constraints. So we can make sure that we keep tangency across this to keep it nice and smooth. So now at the upper edge of our X-star body, we know that our surface is going to perfectly match. So we no longer have that small gap here. So we don't lose any of this work. Let's make sure that we save our file so that we can carry on building this solid body.